Fascism is notoriously difficult to define. Fascism is probably the most difficult political ideology to define. When defining fascism, I recommend focusing on characteristics. Here I am going to define fascism. Fascism, as I define it, consists of three primary characteristics, an array of secondary characteristics, and one strong ontological tendency. The primary characteristics of fascism are collectivism, tribalism, and authoritarianism. Collectivism describes an emphasis on group interests as the most powerful and meaningful political force. Collectivism contrasts with individualism, which regards individual interests as the most powerful and meaningful political force. For collectivists, groups and their interests are the most significant political forces. Tribalism describes a fixation on the interests of one's group. Tribalism is defined by the idea that one's in-group has interests that are in conflict with those of other groups. The in-group must pursue its interests to the detriment of other groups. Authoritarianism describes the absence of democracy, freedom of speech, and freedom of the press. Authoritarianism describes strict government control over the society, with the ruthless oppression of political dissent and that which is deemed to be socially undesirable. Authoritarianism is defined by a total lack of concern for individual rights and civil liberties. The state dominates the individual. Collectivism, tribalism, and authoritarianism. These are the primary characteristics of fascism. These factors, these ideological features, are the beating heart of fascism. They are accompanied by an array of secondary factors. Factors that are of secondary importance to fascism, but are of significance nonetheless. These factors are far more numerous. Cult of personality, a fixation on a charismatic strongman, a love of war and violence, a will to conflict, a desire for bloodshed, the expectation of total obedience, loyalty as the highest virtue, anti-intellectualism to the point of a radical thoughtlessness, a strict emphasis on order, and a rigid hierarchical social structure that embodies that conception of order. The reinvention of tradition, the reconceptualization of tradition, followed by its worship as the highest ideal and core of identity. An aggressive opposition to communism and liberalism. A relentless obsession with degeneracy and sickness within the nation. A constant search for scapegoats to be blamed for any ills faced by the nation. These are the secondary characteristics of fascism. They are not as significant to fascism as its primary characteristics, but they play an important role in making fascism what it is, regardless. Finally, there is the ontological tendency. The ontological tendency describes the way in which fascism tends to conceptualize political and social reality on its most fundamental level. The tendency for collectivist egoism. The idea that individuals are to the nation what cells are to the organism. Individuals only matter in relation to the nation. Individuals only matter as pieces of the nation. Individuals exist to serve the interests of the nation. Any individual who does not is a dangerous rogue cell that needs to be eliminated for the health of the organism. Within the nation, individuals must be totally selfless. They exist to serve the nation. Nations, however, are locked in constant competition and conflict that is defined by amoral egoism. Seen here is a radical egoism between in-groups and a radical selflessness between individuals. Intense moralism within the in-group, absolute amorality between groups. I use the word ontological deliberately. For the fascist, this is the most fundamental level of being. Nations are akin to organisms. Individuals are akin to cells. Individuals must selflessly serve the interests of the nation. Individuals exist to further the interests of the nation. Individuals only matter as servants of the nation. Within the nation, total selflessness is expected. Between nations, amoral egoism and immense selfishness is the norm. At its core, fascism regards in-groups as organisms. Individuals are cells within organisms. They must cooperate flawlessly and selflessly for the good of the organism. Individuals only matter as pieces of the nation, just as cells only matter as pieces of the organism. Fascism is egoistic collectivism. This is the ontological tendency of fascism, the way in which fascists tend to conceptualize the fundamental political and social reality. Fascism, as I understand it, is defined by three primary characteristics, an array of secondary characteristics, and an ontological tendency. Fascism is notoriously difficult to define. In part, this is because such terms are employed incoherently. One cannot come up with a definition that will cover all usage of a term. There will be shortcomings and overflow. This does not indicate failure. You cannot come up with a coherent definition for a term that is employed incoherently without having shortcomings and overflow. Proposed here is a means of understanding fascism. Fascism represents a major political force. It must be understood. Here I have sought to further that understanding.